the break of dawn, the world seemed to hold its breath. The creek, its icy waters shimmering under the faint touch of the early light, wove a tale of both beauty and foreboding. Mina knelt on the cold bank, her fingers trembling as they broke the frozen surface. Each tentative dip stirred memories of long-forgotten whispers, a silent warning etched in the chill of the morning. She reached out, feeling the sting of the frigid water as it coursed up her arms, yet her focus remained, unyielding on the meticulous task before her. With deliberate, almost ritualistic care, she gathered pale, ghostly roots that glowed softly beneath the wan light, setting each one aside, as if it might somehow illuminate the darkness lurking within her thoughts. A heavy silence hung over the forest, an unnatural hush, as if every living creature was bracing itself for an unseen storm. The trees, their skeletal branches bare and whispering in the cold breeze, formed a silent audience to her quiet ritual. Mina's heart pounded steadily, an internal drumbeat that marked both her determination and the dread that pressed upon her like a weight. She recalled the elders' hushed warnings, the subtle, trembling voices that spoke of an alpha whose name was uttered only in fearful reverence. Castor. The mere sound of it stirred something primal and unsettling within her. Yet she dared not let it shatter her delicate focus. As she rinsed each root in the creek's biting water, a question surfaced in her mind. What dark secret lies behind the quiet of the woods? And why does this morning feel so different from all others? Her eyes darted to the shadows creeping along the water's edge, searching, as if expecting a figure to emerge from the gloom. The forest felt alive in a way that was almost too intense, a living, breathing entity that kept its own counsel about the mysteries it harbored. A flicker of movement, a rustle among the dense foliage, sent a shiver racing down her spine. Was it just the wind, or had the silence broken momentarily to reveal an approaching presence? Mina's thoughts tangled between caution and an unyielding need to understand. Each heartbeat echoed like a countdown, raising the stakes in her solitary vigil. In that fragile moment, the creek was not merely a body of water. It was a mirror reflecting not just the first light of day, but the hidden turmoil within her. The landscape around her, brushed in the soft hues of dawn, held traces of an older, wilder era. The creek, with its chattering currents and glacial determination, spoke silently of battles fought long ago, a memory of lives and legends interwoven with the pulse of the earth. Every element of nature seemed to lean in, as though compelled to bear witness to the quiet, relentless ritual unfolding at its edge. Mina couldn't help but wonder if she was part of a grander narrative, an unwritten chapter in a saga that blended beauty with inevitable sorrow. While her hands worked almost automatically, there was a storm of thoughts whirling in her mind. She questioned the very essence of her existence. Was she merely a small, inconspicuous player gathering roots, or was her fate entwined with the colossal, shadowy forces that governed this land? In the solitude of the creek, the whispers of nature merged with those of her own doubts. A spark of defiance ignited somewhere deep inside, an inner promise to challenge the relentless pull of destiny, even if it meant embracing the uncertainties that lay ahead. Yet as the minutes ticked by, the imagery of a solitary figure began to form in her mind, not in the reflection of the water, but as an idea, a spectral presence that might soon step forth from the margins of the forest. The thought was both terrifying and compelling. Who was this elusive force that cast a long shadow over her world? And what did it mean for someone like her, so fragile yet inexplicably tethered to this ancient wilderness? The dreamlike quality of the scene was punctuated by these unanswered questions. Each ripple on the water's surface and every shard of light dancing through the mist carried a promise of revelation, a hint that the day would not unfold as simply as she had hoped. Instead, it would be a day of revelations, of confronting the quiet horror that lay just beneath the surface of normalcy. In that perfect stillness, the creek became more than a backdrop. It transformed into a silent confidant of her most private fears and boldest hopes. As the cold water washed over her fingertips, a solitary thought echoed with both fear and determination. What if today is the day that everything changes? The feeling, as haunting as it was, sent a shiver through her entire being, compelling her to rise above her trepidations and face the destiny that seemed to lurk just beyond the veil of morning mist. In this moment of solitude and raw vulnerability, Mina's resolve hardened. The mystical allure of the creek, bathed in the soft glow of dawn yet shadowed by an enigmatic presence, became a crucible for her own transformation. With every root gathered and every ripple observed, the silent questions of the forest began to weave together into an epic tapestry, a tale of mystery, isolation, and an unspoken promise to challenge the limits of her fate. And as the day slowly stirred to life, the icy creek whispered one final lingering promise: that in the depths of darkness and the uncertainty of a new beginning, something extraordinary was waiting to be discovered. Mina's hands continued their steady work, carefully, gathering the ghostly roots as if each one held a secret. The quiet murmur of the creek and the soft rustling of nearby leaves provided the perfect backdrop for her solitary ritual. Yet, as she bent low over the water, a subtle disturbance rippled through the stillness, a sound not of nature, but of human presence. Slowly, almost hesitantly, she raised her eyes from her task. Standing at the creek's edge was a figure whose presence shattered the calm. It was Coral, another Omega like herself, yet radiating a starkly different energy. Coral's tall frame was draped in a fur-lined cloak that fell in elegant, flowing lines around her, a stark contrast to Mina's threadbare garment. Where Mina's movement spoke of quiet determination and even vulnerability, Coral's posture was poised with an air of unyielding self-assurance, as if she belonged in a world where confidence reigned supreme. "Good morning, sleepyhead," Coral drawled, her tone dripping with playful sarcasm. The mocking lilt in her voice cut through the ambient sounds, replacing the gentle melody of the creek with a sharp note of disdain. Her eyes, bright and calculating, glinted in the early light as she surveyed Mina's humble collection of roots. "I see you're still trying to scurry about in these outskirts," she added, her smile tinged with a mixture of amusement and derision. Mina blinked, feeling a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the cold water. Her heart pounded with a mix of irritation and a deep-seated insecurity. In Coral's presence, the weight of every rumor and whispered warning pressed down upon her. There was an infamous saying that she had heard over and over, one that spoke of the savage alpha's brutal nature. If he wants something, he simply takes it. The thought gnawed at her, a persistent echo she couldn't ignore, and now it resonated in the way Coral's words pricked her skin. Trying to steady her breath, Mina met Coral's gaze with as much calm as she could muster. "I'm just gathering these roots for the healers," she replied softly, forcing her tone to sound even though her voice betrayed a quiver. She wanted nothing more than to continue her task in peace, yet Coral's presence demanded attention, an unwanted interruption to the solitude Mina had carved out for herself. Coral stepped closer, her movement graceful and deliberate, her eyes never leaving Mina's face. "Oh, is that all you do?" she teased, arching an elegant brow. "While some of us might dream of more, you seem content with a life of quiet labor." There was an edge to her words, a combination of mockery and an almost imperceptible challenge. The way she said quiet labor made it sound as if being an Omega meant resigning oneself to insignificance, a notion that stung Mina deeply. Mina's hands clenched around a particularly delicate root. "Not everyone can simply dream," she managed, her tone low yet firm, a subtle refusal to be belittled. Still, she couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that Coral's words masked something more sinister, a warning, perhaps, of a power, dynamic at work, one where the alphas dictated the fates of those like her without a second thought. A moment of silence hung between them, filled with the murmuring of the creek and the tension of unspoken threats. Coral's eyes softened momentarily, as if she was savoring a secret that Mina could never access. "You know," Coral said slowly, her voice dipping to a hushed tone. "They say if the savage alpha sets his sights on something, nothing, and no one can stand in his way." Her words, though spoken almost as a casual observation, carried a weighty implication. The mention of the savage alpha sent a shudder through Mina's core. An unasked question pressed itself against her thoughts. What if this was the day the fragile calm would finally shatter? The sunlight danced on Coral's high cheekbones and along the smooth lines of her jaw, creating an almost hypnotic contrast between her beauty and the harshness that lay in her gaze. In that fleeting moment, Mina caught a glimpse of a truth that made her heart clench, a truth about power and destiny, whispered in a voice laced with both admiration and warning. "But what choice do we have?" Coral continued, her tone almost dismissive now, as if the inevitability of fate was as obvious as the rising sun. "If he wants something, he takes it. And who are we to argue with fate?" Her words rolled off her tongue with a chilling ease, leaving Mina to battle the surge of uncertainty and fear that welled inside her. The cadence of Coral's speech mimicked that of a prophecy, a forewarning that any hope of rebellion might already be slipping through her fingers. Mina's mind raced as she clutched the remaining roots closer to her chest. Each word from Coral's mouth resonated with a subtle threat, intertwining with the rumors that had haunted her steps since the elders first warned her about the savage alpha, Castor. The casual dismissal in Coral's voice belied a dark undercurrent of acceptance, a resignation that one's fate was sealed by forces far beyond their control. And yet, even in this moment of vulnerability, an ember of defiance flickered within Mina. Could it be that she was meant for something more than the quiet, unremarkable existence she had known? As the creek whispered its timeless secrets and the forest held its breath, Mina's inner turmoil deepened. She felt both diminished and irked by the stark comparison with Coral. The pride and arrogance that Coral wore like armor contrasted painfully with her own reserved struggle. The disparity cut deep, planting seeds of doubt about her own worth. "Am I just destined to be overlooked?" she silently questioned, her thoughts clashing with the harsh reality presented by Coral's words. The conversation, though brief, left an indelible mark on the air around them. With one last dismissive glance, Coral turned to leave, her cloak billowing behind her like an omen of something far greater yet lurking in the shadows. As she walked away, her parting words lingered, a spectral promise borne on the cool breeze. "Keep your eyes open, little mouse. Soon, the savage alpha will make his move." Mina stood alone by the creek, the weight of those words settling into the fabric of her being. The fading echo of Coral's voice mingled with the murmurs of the flowing water, intensifying the sense of impending change. The unsettling thought persisted. Was this merely an idle remark, or a prelude to a fated encounter that would upend everything she had ever known? In that charged silence, with the sun climbing just a fraction higher on the horizon, the unresolved tension of the moment built steadily, cascading into a storm of inner conflict. Mina's heart pounded relentlessly, each beat accompanied by the uncertain cadence of the future. In that delicate balance between anxiety and a flickering spark of rebellion, one question loomed large in the fragile stillness. Will the presence of the savage alpha soon shatter this fragile calm? Mina trudged back toward the village with heavy steps, each one a silent testament to the weight of her troubled thoughts. The narrow, muddy path wound through fields of whispering reeds and scattered puddles that reflected the weak morning light. As she neared the cluster of modest cottages, the eerie stillness of the place struck her like a sudden chill. The houses, small and time-worn, were scattered haphazardly along the muddy lanes. Their creaking, uneven roofs and dimly lit windows suggested a community caught in a never-ending state of wary vigilance. Every structure seemed to echo with secrets that the wind carried off into the distance. At first glance, the village might have appeared peaceful. Yet beneath its tranquil exterior flowed a deep undercurrent of anxiety. Conversations, though hushed and seemingly insignificant, hinted at a growing unease among the inhabitants. As Mina passed by, she could almost hear the barely audible murmur of voices, neighbors exchanging worried glances and whispering about strange sightings along the borders. The words "men of Castor" drifted through the murmur, each syllable laden with dread. It was as if the very air vibrated with foreboding warnings, each gentle breeze carrying a shadow of impending doom. Outside a weathered wooden door, a small group of villagers huddled together. Their faces were drawn and pale as they spoke in low, urgent tones about unusual tracks found near the boundary and eerie howls that had punctured the night. The conversation was soft enough to be lost amid the ambient sounds, yet its meaning was unmistakable. Something was stirring beyond the safe confines of the village, something that held the promise of disruption and strife. Mina's heart quickened at the sound of these whispers. Every rumor, every hushed conversation, added another layer of tension to the already heavy air that enveloped the village. Passing by a narrow alley, Mina caught sight of an elderly man leaning against a crooked post. He seemed almost a part of the dilapidated scenery, a silent witness to the village's slow descent into fear. He shook his head slowly as if recalling stories of older, darker times. "They say even the bravest souls tremble at the sound of Castor's name," he murmured under his breath, his eyes distant and burdened by memories of past horrors. That single fleeting remark sent a ripple of unease through Mina. It was one thing to hear rumors whispered in moments of quiet dread. It was another to confront them in the echo of a real voice, worn with sorrow and resignation. As Mina continued her journey, she noticed how the usual sounds of daily life had been stifled. The chattering of children, the clatter of carts, and even the simple greeting between neighbors were replaced by an oppressive silence. It was as though the entire village had collectively drawn a deep breath, waiting with bated anticipation for something dreadful to unfold. Even the creak of old wooden signs seemed louder, punctuating the stillness like a warning bell in an otherwise muted world. Every sound felt amplified in the tense morning air. The crunch of her boots sinking in the soft mud, the rustle of dried leaves swirling in uneasy eddies, and the faint, almost inaudible hum of distant creatures that might be lurking beyond the village borders. As these whispers of nature blended with the murmurs of the people, a gnawing question took root in Mina's mind. Will the looming threat shatter the fragile normalcy of this village? The thought was as persistent as it was unsettling, a dark cloud on the horizon of her consciousness that refused to be ignored. A group of women gathered near the communal well, their faces etched with worry as they exchanged fragments of news about border patrols and unexplained disturbances. One of them clutched a small bundle of supplies as though it were a talisman against the unknown. Their words, though soft and nearly drowned by the muted clamor of the village, carried a weight that made Mina's pulse race. Here was the evidence of a community on the brink, a community that had learned to live with its secrets, yet could no longer hide from the growing menace that crept ever closer with each passing day. Amid the quiet tension, Mina felt isolated by her own unspoken fears. Every whispered warning and every furtive glance from a passing villager deepened the solitude within her. She could not escape the constant reminder that somewhere out there, the savage alpha's legacy loomed, a force so powerful and unyielding that it threatened to rewrite her destiny and upend the fragile peace of the village forever. In that moment, the stillness was not a blessing, but a brittle, deceptive calm, fragile as the first frost before the storm. The atmosphere was charged with a disquieting anticipation. As the morning wore on, the sun fought a losing battle against the dense mist and creeping gloom that had settled over the village. The very light seemed dimmed by the collective fear, casting long, uncertain shadows along the muddy lanes. With each step, Mina sensed the pull of the unknown, a magnetic force drawing her deeper into a reality where whispered warnings were potent preludes to catastrophe. In the silence that followed, as she paused before a humble dwelling and listened. To the hushed worries of those around her, one question surged in her mind, resonating through the stillness like a soft, persistent drum. Will the looming threat shatter the fragile normalcy of this village? Mina hesitated at the weathered wooden door of the healer's house, her heart heavy with a mixture of dread and resignation. The small structure, built of time-worn logs and adorned with faded carvings, exuded an air of solemnity and centuries of whispered remedies. Inside, the dim light flickered against rough-hewn walls, casting long shadows that seemed to mirror the lingering uncertainties within her. With a deep, shaky breath, she stepped inside, clutching tightly the basket that cradled the roots she had so painstakingly gathered, yet now tarnished and partially ruined by Coral's careless interference. As she entered, a few elderly women, the village healers, looked up from their work with expressions that bore both pity and a trace of reproach. Their eyes, steeped in years of hardship and wisdom, assessed the meager harvest of roots that Mina had brought. One of them clicked her tongue softly, a sound that cut through the quiet murmur of the room like a brittle whisper. Mina's heart sank further. Each subtle judgment stoked the embers of her already fragile sense of inadequacy. She placed the basket on a rough-hewn table, trying to keep her hands steady, even as her throat tightened with self-doubt. These are all I managed to bring," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, laden with the weight of both exhaustion and an internal disquiet that had been growing for too long. The healers exchanged glances, their eyes reflecting both concern and disapproval. A sigh, soft and resigned, escaped one of them, as if the sight of the damaged roots was a silent testament to a life that had forever fallen short of perfection. In the quiet hum of the healer's house, the room seemed to contract around her, emphasizing the loneliness that had clung to Mina since she left the village. Every creak of the wooden floor reminded her that she was an outsider in a place where familiarity once offered solace. The walls, lined with bundles of dried herbs and cracked mortar, appeared to hold the collective memories of past afflictions, memories that now seemed to mock her own struggle for adequacy. Mina's thoughts churned with conflict. On one hand, she craved the safety and quiet reassurance the healer's home represented, a refuge from the harsh judgments and the unspoken expectations of a community that had already turned its back on her in many small ways. On the other, a deep gnawing fear had settled within her, a fear of not being enough, of never truly belonging. She remembered all too well the whispered rumors about her, the way others hinted that if the savage alpha desired something, he would seize it, without question. This internal strife left her feeling exposed and vulnerable, as if every shortfall were amplified beneath the dim light. As one of the healers reached for a small set of tools, a wooden mortar and pestle worn smooth by years of use, Mina's inner voice screamed silently that she had failed, that the roots, which could have represented a hopeful remedy, now symbolized her failure to meet the expectations placed upon her. The other healers, too, moved with their own quiet efficiency, unaware or perhaps uncaring of the inner turmoil that swirled like a storm within the young Omega. Even as they began to sort through the meager collection, their expert eyes seemed to scrutinize not only the damaged product, but also the person who had dared to present it. She stood there, trapped between a desperate need for acceptance and a persistent sense of isolation. Each measured glance from the healers felt like a reminder of what she was not, a beacon of strength or a paragon of worth. Instead, she felt small and inconsequential, akin to a fragile sprout struggling against a harsh winter. Her hands trembled as she tried to hide the evidence of her inner battle, the way her grip tightened around the worn basket, as if it could anchor her in a sea of doubt. Time seemed to stretch in the quiet, the only sound being the soft, continuous rustling of dried leaves outside the window. The conversation among the healers was sparse, a series of hushed exchanges that left more questions than answers. Mina couldn't help but listen intently, each whispered word echoing in her mind like a harsh verdict. Some spoke of remedies, for the body, while others, in soft and solemn tones, discussed cures for the soul, cures that seemed forever out of reach for someone like her. The weight of unspoken expectations pressed down, and Mina felt the chill of isolation seep into the very core of her being. In that solemn space, feelings of inadequacy and self-reproach mingled with a flicker of hope, a fragile desire to find a way out of this tyranny of fate that seemed to encircle her every step. The healer's measured glances, the subtle nods of command, and even the disinterested rustle of the wind outside painted a picture of a life that was both harsh and unforgiving. And yet, amid the quiet judgment and the solitude that now defined her existence, Mina found herself silently asking, "Is there any hope for escape from this tyranny of fate?" As twilight surrendered to night, a pall of darkness fell over the village. The once dim light of dawn was replaced by a thick, impenetrable gloom that clung to every roof and crevice. Cold wind whispered through the narrow gaps in the wooden walls and crept under every door, carrying with it the biting chill of an unforgiving winter. The windows, shuddering under the force of the gusts, flickered with erratic shadows that danced against the worn planks like restless phantoms. Mina stood at the threshold of her modest lodging, her eyes scanning the murky outlines of familiar shapes swallowed by the dark. A heavy silence gripped the village, a silence so profound it felt as if the world were holding its breath, bracing for an event too dreadful to name. The only sound was the mournful wail of the wind as it bent and twisted around the skeletal trees that lined the outskirts, their bare branches scratching at the sky like desperate outstretched fingers. Then, from the distant boundary where the village melted into the vast unknown of the surrounding forest, a low, resonant howl pierced the quiet. It was not a single cry, but a chorus of tormented notes, a symphony of anguish and warning echoing through the night. The sound sent a tremor racing down Mina's spine, a visceral, uncontrollable shudder that rooted her to the spot. The howl was both beautiful and terrifying, a raw expression of nature's untamed fury that heralded an ominous presence. In that moment, every nerve in her body came alive with trepidation. Mina's eyes widened, reflecting the pale, shifting light from the flickering lanterns in the windows as she strained to listen. Each howl seemed to carry a sinister message, a subtle warning that hinted at the awakening of something vast and merciless. Her heartbeat quickened, synchronizing with the rhythm of the wind and the mournful song of the unseen beasts. The sound was not random. It was a deliberate herald of calamity, a signal that dark forces were stirring, forces that could shatter the fragile calm of all she had known. A sense of profound vulnerability gripped her. In the solitude of that cold, stifling night, Mina felt as if she were standing on the precipice of doom, the familiar boundaries of safety dissolving into the darkness. The howls, echoing with an almost supernatural resonance, seemed to come from a place beyond the tangible, from the very shadows that cloaked the land. What dark forces are stirring in the shadows of this lonely night? She wondered silently, the question reverberating through her mind with each exhaled breath. The contrast between the oppressive darkness outside and the dim, feeble light within her modest room only heightened her anxiety. Every creak of the wooden structure, every rustle of unseen movement, sharpened the sense that the night was alive with hidden terror. In the stillness, even the sound of her own breathing seemed unnaturally loud, underscoring the profound isolation she felt in that moment of vulnerability. As the night deepened, the chill in the air grew more intense, the cold seeping into her bones with relentless persistence. The howls, now a continuous, mournful chorus, blended with the crackling of wind against the windows, forging a symphony of dread that filled the silence. Mina's thoughts raced as she tried to piece together the meaning behind these unnerving sounds, each note of the howl a reminder of an unstoppable force beyond her control. Had these cries always been a part of the night's fabric, or were they a prelude to something far more sinister and unimaginable? Outside, the forest appeared to shift and breathe in the darkness. Shadows moved with a life of their own, and, The distant outlines of ancient trees formed grotesque silhouettes against the starless sky. In those ephemeral moments, the line between reality and nightmare blurred, leaving her to question what was truly there and what was born of her own. Fear, each shriek from the unknown, each whispered gust of wind, held the promise of a looming threat, a relentless power waiting to make itself known at the most inopportune moment. Mina's heart raced, her thoughts a chaotic cascade of fear and defiance. She recalled the elders' stories, the ominous tales of a force so formidable that no one dared mention its name aloud. Those stories of the savage alpha, of power seized without mercy, flashed through her mind in a frenzied montage. The night's symphony of howls and rustling leaves seemed to confirm those dark legends, merging past whispers with present terror. Every instinct within her urged Mina to seek shelter, to wrap herself in the safety of familiar routines. Yet, the oppressive atmosphere of the night left her questioning if any sanctuary could truly exist against such dark, elemental forces. The tension in the air was nearly tangible, a heavy, silent promise that the calm before the storm was about to give way to chaos. In that charged moment, standing at the cold window with wide, apprehensive eyes, Mina couldn't shake the overwhelming thought that something monumental was on the horizon. The fragile normalcy of the village, long maintained by an uneasy truce with the unknown, was now at the brink of shattering. The eerie chorus from beyond the boundary grew louder, more insistent, an infernal prelude to an inevitable reckoning. As the night wore on, Mina's mind swirled with questions that offered no comfort. With a deep, resigned sigh, she pressed, her hand against the cold glass, as if to both welcome and ward off the encroaching terror. In that solitary, haunted moment, the burning question echoed in her heart, with a clarity that chilled her even more. What dark forces are stirring in the shadows of this lonely night? The call for an emergency gathering came suddenly, shattering the fragile veil of routine that had momentarily cloaked the village. Rowing swiftly through the corridors and muddy lanes, citizens hastily converged upon the central square, a place usually reserved for quiet assemblies and everyday chatter. Instead, under the darkening sky and amidst the chill of uncertainty, the square buzzed with an electric tension that could be felt in every whispered word and every trembling glance. Rows of nervous faces and furrowed brows formed an uneasy sea of collective anxiety, all of them drawn together by the ominous name that had already sparked terror in their hearts. Castor. At the center of the square stood Rowan, the village elder and resolute leader, whose typically strong demeanor now seemed fragile under the weight of the situation. His usually steady voice quavered as he took the makeshift podium, a raised patch of earth that served as the heart of the assembly. As he cleared his throat, silence fell abruptly, punctuating the dread that hung in the air, every eye fixated on him, the vulnerable hope of the gathered crowd resting on his next few words. "Fellow villagers," Rowan began, his tone low and burdened, "I come before you with grave news. There have been sightings near our borders, evidence that a force of unprecedented strength is gathering beyond our defenses." His voice, though intended to comfort, betrayed a deep tremor, as if each syllable carried the weight of fate itself. The name Castor, it is whispered in fear and trembling among us. We have seen signs, marks left behind that cannot be ignored. It appears that the savage alpha, whose power is spoken of in hushed tones, may soon be upon us. The murmurs among the crowd grew louder, an indistinct cacophony of apprehensive voices. Eyes darted nervously from one to another. The collective heartbeat of the village surged in response to the burden of this revelation. Mina, standing at the edge of the gathering, felt her own pulse race, a mix of dread and a desperate hope to cling to some semblance of normalcy. Amid the anxious sea of faces, each individual wore a mirror of collective fear, each silent expression a testament to the looming threat. The village, usually a patchwork of simple lives, now appeared as a single, unified entity, shrouded in sorrow and foreboding. Rowan continued, his eyes sweeping over the anxious throng, as if trying to infuse them with resolve from his own faltering. Strength. "Our scouts report that strange tracks have been found," he said, pausing momentarily to let the gravity settle in. "Large, unmistakable paw marks. Signs that the predators of legend are stirring in our midst." His trembling voice, resonant with foreboding, made it clear that this was no mere rumor or idle tale. It was a chilling reality that could not be dismissed lightly. The air crackled with suspense as Rowan's words painted a vivid picture of impending calamity. His next words, barely above a whisper, sent shivers down the spines of those present. "If these forces continue to amass, we may soon find ourselves at the mercy of a savage presence, a force that changes everything." At that moment, palpable, collective anxiety gripped the assembly, transforming each murmur into a silent, internal scream. In the midst of the anxious crowd, Mina felt as if she were submerged beneath a weight of unspoken dread. Surrounded by fearful eyes, she was acutely aware of her own vulnerability. An isolated spark of uncertainty flickering in a sea of alarm. The threat of Castor, the rumored savage alpha, was not merely an abstract concept, but a looming specter that cast its dark shadow over every hopeful plan and every shared whisper. For Mina, whose heart had grown accustomed to the unyielding solitude of her existence, this moment was both terrifying and strangely galvanizing. She wondered if her own quiet resolve could stand against the tide of fate that seemed to be rushing, inexorably toward them all. Around her, the villagers exchanged whispered warnings, half-truths and desperate hopes that spoke of escape, of rallying against the inevitable, yet always circled back to the same dreaded name. "Castor," they murmured, as if the very sound was a curse. Their eyes, filled with silent terror, spoke of nights spent awake, haunted by dreams of unrelenting power and merciless conquest. The dread was palpable, and it seemed to permeate even the stone and soil of the square. As the meeting wore on, the atmosphere grew heavier, as if the very air was laden with despair. A profound unease settled over everyone, a shared consciousness of impending disaster that was impossible to ignore. The sound of distant howls echoed faintly through the darkness beyond the square, a reminder that the threat was no longer an abstract possibility, but a near certainty. Each howl resonated with the promise of havoc, amplifying the collective fear of the gathered crowd. Rowan's final words, uttered with a heavy sigh and a lingering tremor, echoed in every heart present. "Prepare yourselves, for soon a presence will descend upon us, a savage presence that will change everything." With that, a final, sullen murmur rippled through the crowd, a mixture of despair and resigned determination. The meeting disbanded in a shattering silence, leaving Mina and the other villagers to ponder over the fearful promise of what was to come. In that long, lingering moment before the crowd dispersed into the cold night, the shared question loomed large over everyone. Will this dreadful force, this savage presence, soon shatter the delicate semblance of normalcy that has long defined their lives? The heavy murmur of fear and uncertainty in the square was suddenly shattered by a presence so commanding it seemed to freeze time itself. Out of the darkness, emerging like a living legend, stood Castor. Tall and imposing, his eyes burned with an intensity that sent shockwaves through every soul present. The savage alpha's presence radiated raw power, and as he stepped forward, the murmurs of the fearful crowd fell into an eerie, expectant silence. With deliberate, measured strides, Castor approached the center of the assembly. His voice, deep and resonant, cut through the charged air like a razor. "I want her," he declared, his tone both cold and unequivocal. In that moment, every heartbeat quickened, as if the entire village were suspended in a state of collective terror and awe. His words hit like a blow, reverberating with a grim finality that left no doubt about his intent. The reaction was instantaneous and overwhelming. A gasp rippled through the crowd. a sound of shock mingled with despair. Eyes widened, faces turned, pale, and a hush deepened the already oppressive silence. Rowan, standing at the forefront with a defiant glimmer in his eyes, clenched his fist so hard that his knuckles turned white. His usually steady voice broke as he shouted, "You have no right." The defiance in his tone was as palpable as the fear etched on every villager's face. Yet, even as Rowan struggled to fortify his resolve, the weight of Castor's declaration was a crushing reminder of a fate that many felt powerless to defy. Among the sea of startled faces, Mina felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. The words "I want her" echoed in her ears like a curse, igniting a torrent of conflicting emotions. A surge of terror mingled with an ineffable haunting curiosity. An inner voice screamed silently, "Why me?" In that moment, Mina's heart pounded with the fury of a life both stolen and fated. Questioning the twisted destiny that now loomed over her, her thoughts spiraled into a haze of disbelief. What will become of the Omega when the savage Alpha claims her? The tension in the square was thick enough to slice through, each second stretching into an eternity of silent dread. Every villager's gaze was fixed on Castor, their eyes searching for an escape from the brutal inevitability of the moment. Some faces contorted with anger, others with tearful resignation. The assembled crowd, caught in the grip of collective anxiety, bore witness to a turning point in their lives, a moment where the balance of power, so long maintained by unspoken rules and caution, was about to be irrevocably disturbed. Castor's eyes, cold and decisive, swept over the gathered assembly with an almost predatory precision. His presence was magnetic, drawing every anxious breath and trembling gaze toward him. His words, simple yet devastating, left no room for negotiation. In that charged space, the fate of Mina, and perhaps that of the entire village, was sealed in the sound of his declaration. It was a fated encounter, a turning of the tide that would ripple through the lives of all in attendance. For Rowan, the defiant leader who had come to bear the weight of the village's hopes and fears, the moment was both a personal and collective reckoning. His vehement protests, fueled by years of protecting his people, clashed with the overwhelming force that Castor embodied. Despite his bravado, a silent acknowledgement of the power behind that cold, unyielding declaration passed through his eyes. The raw terror in his trembling voice was mirrored by a glimmer of helplessness, a quiet admission that sometimes even the strongest among them were at the mercy of destiny's harsh decree. Amid the barrage of emotions swirling around her, Mina felt exposed and vulnerable, her heart pounding as though it might break free from her chest. The internal conflict was excruciating. A part of her screamed in defiance, unwilling to be reduced to an object of possession, while another part recoiled at the sheer inevitability of the savage Alpha's command. Her inner turmoil was a storm, of shock and defiance, mingled with the unspoken horror of being singled out, as if her very existence had been predetermined for this cruel destiny. Each set of eyes in the crowd seemed to whisper the same unvoiced question, a collective pondering of a future now tinged with inescapable despair. The words, "What will become of the Omega when the savage Alpha claims her?" reverberated, without a voice, carried in the weighted silence between Castor's declaration and Rowan's protest. It was a haunting inquiry, one that captured the agony of fate and the crushing inevitability of power unchallenged. As Castor paused, his gaze locking briefly with Mina's, time itself seemed to waver. In that fleeting moment, the dreadful certainty of the Alpha's intentions and the vulnerable uncertainty of her existence collided. The world around them narrowed to just that encounter, a silent, powerful reminder that nothing would ever be the same again. When Castor's imposing figure finally began to turn and retreat, leaving behind a lingering trace of his chilling intent, the atmosphere was electric with a mix of relief and disquiet. Even as Rowan's fervent defiance filled the air, the stark reality remained. The fate of the Omega, and with it, the lives of every soul in the village, was now irrevocably tied to a savage presence that promised to change everything. Mina's world, once defined by the familiar rhythms of village life, now crumbled beneath her feet. The sound of hurried footsteps and harsh commands echoed through the narrow, muddy lanes as the villagers, faces etched with resignation and sorrow, watched in silent disbelief. In the midst of it all, Mina found herself being forced away, prisoner of fate, tethered to a destiny she had never chosen. The gentle hum of routine was brutally interrupted by the clamor of enforced departure. Castor's command had been unyielding. With cold precision, a pack of half-shifted wolves moved as one, their eyes glinting with unspoken authority. They circled Mina like a living barrier, their presence overwhelming, leaving no room for escape or protest. The sound of their synchronized steps on the softened earth, mixed with the desperate pleas of a few onlookers, created a cacophony of grief that resonated deep within her. In that agonizing moment, the village, the place where she had once felt a whisper of belonging, melted away into a blur of sorrow and bitter inevitability. Her heart pounded as she struggled to make sense of the scene unfolding before her. Once these lanes had been familiar, a patchwork of muddy pathways and humble cottages, where the laughter of neighbors mingled with the rustle of everyday life. Now, every step away from that homely embrace felt like a wedge driven into her soul, cutting deep with each reluctant movement. Each familiar landmark, the crooked barn, the worn stones lining the path, even the whispering trees that swayed gently in the wind, became painful reminders of a world she was being ruthlessly torn from. As Mina was pulled along, her eyes darted around in a desperate search for any spark of hope amidst the chaos. The once vibrant colors of the village had faded into a somber palette, and the gentle murmur of friendly greetings was replaced by the harsh, discordant sounds of a life uprooted. The pack's unyielding march left her feeling powerless, a mere object in a grand scheme dictated by the savage alpha's cold, ruthless will. Each jolt from the determined pull of those monstrous beings deepened the chasm of loss inside her, as if every step was a further descent into the abyss of captivity. Her mind churned with conflicting thoughts and emotions. Was this the beginning of a new, unknowable chapter? Or had hope been extinguished entirely? The question echoed in the vacant spaces of her heart. Is this a new beginning, or the end of all hope? Each moment of forced movement stirred memories of a life that had been when the sun shone gently on morning fields and laughter filled narrow streets. Those moments, now fragments of a past life, only made the present torment all the more excruciating. The landscape that once held promise of shelter and familiarity now shifted with every step. The village receded into a haze as unfamiliar territory loomed ahead, a wilderness controlled by an alpha's will and the unyielding pack that enforced his command. The very air, dense with the chill of despair, seemed to close in around her, a suffocating reminder that she was no longer free. Captivity was no longer a word, but a living, breathing reality that gripped her with icy talons. The once welcoming sky was now overcast and heavy, mirroring the despair in her heart and casting a pall over everything she once held dear. Tears blurred her vision as she struggled to comprehend the gravity of her loss. For every step forced upon her, there was an echo of every cherished memory slipping further away, a home that would soon be nothing more than a distant, painful recollection. The thought of losing not only a physical space, but an entire identity she had built over the years pierced her spirit. In the relentless pull of destiny, her inner turmoil swirled with the bitter taste of injustice and a desperate longing for freedom. Her mind raced through flashes of overheard conversations, fleeting moments where whispered rumors had hinted at a harsh fate awaiting those who defied the savage alpha's dominion. Each murmur, each half-spoken warning, now converged. In the horrifying reality of her enforced departure, the certainty of the alpha's indomitable will and the impending weight of his power made her feel as though she were ensnared in a net woven from threads of fate. Threads she could not escape, no matter how much she wished to reclaim her freedom. in nigh. The midst of the chaos, the faces of onlookers, some stoic, others tearful, blurred into a tapestry of shared sorrow and unspoken resignation. Their eyes, filled with empathy and despair, silently bore witness to the unraveling of a world where hope had once thrived. Mina's own eyes, though wet with unshed tears, reflected that same collective anguish. The realization that her life, once vibrant and full of possibility, was now shadowed by a future ruled by force and compulsion. As the procession dragged her farther from the only home she had ever known, the weight of her fate bore down on her like an anchor. Each step, heavy and reluctant, was a painful reminder that she was being torn from the familiar, from a sense of belonging that had defined her existence. And amidst the oppressive march toward an uncertain horizon, the question still lingered in the depths of her mind. A question as raw and unyielding as the cold wind that chilled her to the bone. Is this a new beginning or the end of all hope? Mina's journey into the savage domain began as the landscape transformed before her eyes. The familiar comfort of the village receded behind her, replaced by a wild, untamed frontier. Every step on the rugged, uneven path was a reminder that she had entered a realm where nature ruled with an iron fist, a realm foreign and unyielding compared to the life she once knew. The earth beneath her feet was no longer soft and predictable. It was a mixture of rocky outcrops and deep, gaping ruts that threatened to swallow her whole. The narrow trail wound through dense forests, where ancient trees towered overhead, their gnarled branches intertwining to form a vault-like canopy that dimmed the light, casting the world in a perpetual twilight. A cold wind howled between these towering sentinels, its mournful song echoing the struggle and uncertainty that churned within her. Each step forward was punctuated by the crunch of gravel and the rustle of dried leaves swept along by the persistent wind. The sounds of nature seemed amplified here. The creak of a bending branch, the distant rustle of undergrowth disturbed by unseen creatures, and the eerie whisper of the wind as it danced across the jagged terrain. These sounds melded into a symphony of raw wilderness, a constant, restless reminder that she was treading on unfamiliar ground, where every moment might hold danger or revelation. As Mina moved deeper into this wild expanse, she felt the stark contrast between her past and her present. The neatly arranged cottages, the cozy warmth of familiar faces, and the gentle cadence of everyday village life were now replaced by an unpredictable, almost brutal environment. Here, survival was dictated by the harsh rules of nature, where the boundaries between life and death were as blurred as the shifting mists that clung to the forest floor at dawn. Her heart raced with a mix of trepidation and a strange, exhilarating curiosity. Despite the hardship of her journey, a small part of her could not help but wonder what awaited beyond the treacherous path. Each twist and turn of the trail seemed to hold a secret, every shadow in the underbrush a potential harbinger of fate. What awaits beyond the treacherous path? She silently questioned, her voice barely audible above the chorus of the wilderness. The changing light added to the eeriness of the scene. At times, the weak sun pierced through the canopy in sporadic, golden beams, momentarily illuminating the rich hues of moss and the delicate patterns of ferns unfurling in the dappled light. At other moments, clouds would obscure the sun, plunging her into near darkness, where even the smallest sound took on the weight of 1,000 fears. In these moments, the landscape appeared endless and forbidding, a vast territory stretching into the unknown. Mina's emotions were as tumultuous as the environment surrounding her. As she pushed forward, every rough patch of the road and every sharp turn stirred in her memories of a life that felt worlds away. The gentle cadence of village life was replaced by the harsh symphony of nature's fury, igniting in her a profound loneliness and a desperate yearning for the comfort of what had been. Yet, deep within that isolation lay an ember of determination, a quiet resilience that urged her to prove that even in this alien wilderness, she might carve out a new path. The physical strain was matched by an equally intense inner battle. Thoughts of her past mingled with the reality of her present, weaving together a tapestry of conflicting emotions. the pain of loss, and the bitter taste of captivity, tangled with a flicker of hope that perhaps destiny might still be kind if she dared to challenge its course. Every strained breath and every labored step served as both a reminder and a challenge, a testament to the struggle she had yet to overcome. Throughout the journey, the wild domain seemed to pulse with an undercurrent of impending violence, the distant calls of unknown creatures, and the rustle of predator movements among the fallen leaves hinted at a looming danger waiting in the shadows. It was as if the land itself was alive, teeming with silent threats and unpredictable moments that would erupt into chaos at any time. The foreboding atmosphere pressed upon Mina, raising the stakes of every decision she made on this precarious path. In the midst of her arduous trek, she paused for a moment on a rocky outcrop to catch her breath. Looking out over a valley shrouded in mist, Mina's thoughts turned inward. The beauty of the wilderness, despite its harshness, held an undeniable allure, a wild majesty that spoke of the untamed essence of nature. Yet, this beauty was tempered by an omnipresent sense of danger, an ever-present reminder that this domain was no place for the weak or the unprepared. The delicate balance between awe and terror was maintained in every rustle of wind, every play of light across the rugged terrain. As she resumed her journey, the question that had haunted her only grew louder. What awaits beyond the treacherous path? This question was not just a manifestation of her fear. It was a call to face the unknown, to confront the fierce challenges that lay ahead. The path was arduous and unforgiving, but it also promised the possibility of a future that was entirely uncharted. In that possibility, Mina sensed both the peril of complete loss and the potential for rebirth, a chance to redefine her fate in the wild, savage lands that now claimed her. The journey into the savage domain was not merely a physical traversal of rough and rugged terrain. It was an inward voyage into the depths of her own resilience. The landscape, vibrant yet merciless, was the crucible in which her destiny would be forged. With every uncertain step, every fleeting moment of beauty and terror, the mystery of her future deepened. And as the wind howled and the wild forest whispered its secrets, Mina pressed on, determined to find an answer to that haunting question, even as the looming destiny of this untamed land threatened to swallow her whole. Mina's eyes widened as the savage settlement emerged from the haze, a world utterly different from the village she had once known. Gone were the comforting sights of humble cottages and familiar pathways. In their place stood a formidable enclave, marked by the presence of half-shifted wolves and human-like figures who moved with a predatory grace. The very air bristled with hostility, as if the land itself had been transformed into a battleground. The settlement's structures were rugged and imposing, built with rough-hewn timber and adorned with symbols that spoke of ancient, unyielding traditions of war and survival. Here, every element of the environment exuded an aura of raw power and relentless defiance. As she stepped cautiously into this alien landscape, Mina couldn't help but feel the sting of isolation deep within her bones. The narrow paths between the stout wooden barricades were patrolled by vigilant eyes, cold, assessing glances that seemed to pierce through her very soul. The villagers here carried themselves with an air of unspoken suspicion. Their every movement was tight and precise, as if they were constantly ready to spring into action at the slightest provocation. In the dim light, shadows danced across stern faces and weathered skins, and every whispered comment or sidelong glance reinforced the boundaries that separated her from this fierce community. Every step she took stirred up memories of a quieter past, a life filled with simple routines and the gentle cadence of village chatter. Now, those soft memories were replaced by a cacophony of harsh commands, clashing footsteps, and the distant, echoing growls of battle. The atmosphere was thick with the promise of conflict, and the air itself seemed to crackle with an undercurrent of aggression. Mina felt as though she were walking into the heart of a storm, one that threatened not only her freedom, but the very essence of who she was. Her heart pounded with a mixture of fear and reluctant fascination. The stark contrast between the lush, peaceful fields she had left behind and the rugged, militaristic aura of this new settlement was overwhelming. Every building, every outstretched figure in the gathering, spoke of a purpose both brutal and unyielding. Mina's once gentle world had been replaced by an existence where strength reigned supreme, and any hint of weakness was met with disdain. Faces turned toward her with barely concealed hostility, whispers of her past life trailing in the air as though she were an intruder in a land that did not welcome outsiders. Amid the throng of wary eyes, some cast sideways glances filled with palpable derision, while others murmured softly amongst themselves, as if debating the worth of this new arrival. Mina felt every unspoken judgment like a physical weight, a reminder that here she did not belong. The hostile stares and furtive exchanges were a constant, oppressive force, pressing down on her spirit and threatening to break her will. Each step forward felt like wading through a mire of preconceived notions and age-old prejudices that had long ruled this ruthless world. Just as Mina began to wonder whether she could ever adapt to such a harsh existence, a commanding presence materialized from the crowd. A figure emerged who exuded an authority that, despite its severity, carried an unmistakable weight of experience. It was Cora, a powerful, no-nonsense leader whose reputation as a steadfast warrior was evident in every confident stride. Her eyes, sharp and discerning, seemed to size up every newcomer with a mix of practicality and guarded curiosity. As Cora approached, the murmurs in the crowd hushed, the pervasive hostility softening into a cautious silence. Mina's breath caught in her throat as Cora drew near. The contrast was striking. While the others in the settlement expressed overt suspicion and disdain, Cora's presence was an enigma, imbued with a sense of leadership that both commanded respect and evoked a certain reluctance to challenge her authority. Yet, even as Cora's gaze fell upon her, a whirlwind of conflicting emotions surged within Mina. Was this a gesture of welcome, or merely another measure of her worthlessness in a world that prized strength above all else? For a long, heavy moment, the two stood in silence, Mina's heart pounding erratically as she tried to decipher the emotions hidden in Cora's inscrutable expression. The eyes that met hers were neither warm nor cold, but rather a complex blend of interrogation and potential acceptance. In that charged instant, Mina's mind was filled with an unspoken question, one that had haunted her since the very first moments of her forced departure. Can she ever find a place to belong in this ruthless world? As Cora's penetrating gaze lingered, the unsettled murmurs of the crowd resumed in subdued tones, hinting at grudging acceptance as well as deep-rooted suspicion. The settlement, with its architecture of raw power and a community forged in conflict, seemed to offer no easy answers. Only the promise of trials yet to come, and the harsh reality that integration here would demand she shed all that she had once known. The shifting moods of those around her, the cold logic in their eyes, and the pervasive reminder of the brutal legacy left by the savage alpha, all wove together into a tapestry of alienation and reluctant integration. In that moment, as the darkened sky cast long, unforgiving shadows over the settlement, Mina realized that her path had irrevocably diverged from the gentle life of her past. She was now a part of a world defined by survival, power, and continuous struggle. A world where every person, every creature, fought to assert their dominance or hold on to a precious glimmer of hope. And within that chaotic collision of alienation, hostility, and the possibility of acceptance, she was left to grapple with a question that would haunt her for every day to come. Can she ever find a place to belong in this ruthless world? The days that followed were a blur of relentless activity as Mina struggled to adjust to her new life among the pack. The settlement's harsh rhythm dictated every waking moment, a stark contrast to the gentle cadence of the village she had known. Forced to abandon the comforting routines of her past, Mina now found herself immersed in a world of arduous labor and rigorous assignments, each task a trial in proving her worth. Her mornings began before the sun had fully claimed the sky. With little more than a few salvage tools and an aching determination, she joined the other pack members in gathering food and essential supplies. The tasks were simple in nature: hauling firewood, fetching water from deep, cold wells, and foraging for medicinal herbs among the dense woodland. Yet each chore carried an unspoken weight. Every time Mina lifted a heavy log or navigated a treacherous path through underbrush, she felt the invisible barrier of her past life crumble further, replaced by a burgeoning resolve to belong. The sweat on her brow and the aching muscles were constant reminders of the struggle, but also of the inner strength that was slowly emerging within her. During these early assignments, Mina's interactions with her new companions were a complex tapestry of cautious gestures, understated conflicts, and fleeting moments of support. One particularly tense encounter occurred with Jax, a beta whose sharp eyes and curt demeanor left little room for softness. As Mina carefully balanced a load of dried meat sacks along a muddy trail, Jax intercepted her path, his voice, laced with both skepticism and barely concealed disdain, cut through the morning chill. "You seem clumsy with those supplies," he remarked, his tone edging on derisive. The words stung. Each syllable fueled an inner turmoil, questioning whether they would ever see her as one of their own. Mina's throat tightened, her eyes flicking downward as she fought to maintain her composure. A part of her longed to retort, to shout that she was more than just a displaced Omega, but the fear of further alienation kept her tongue silent. Instead, she offered a small, trembling nod and continued on her arduous path, even as the echo of his harsh words reverberated within her. Not all encounters, however, were marred by such harshness. Cora, the battle-hardened leader of the pack, was a constant presence, a figure of unyielding authority who both reprimanded and, at times, reassured her. After a laborious morning session, as Mina and a small group of others returned to the settlement, Cora's voice rang out sharply, directing them to organize their gathered supplies. "You need to focus and work precisely, or you'll only slow us down," she admonished, her tone firm and uncompromising. The words stung, not only as a reminder of the relentless expectations placed upon her, but also as an indication that there was no room for mistakes in this unforgiving world. Even as the day's tasks wore on, Mina's thoughts could not escape the simmering question that haunted her mind. Will they ever see me as one of their own? It was a question that lurked in every interaction, every pointed glance, and every word of quiet scorn. Each task carried dual meaning. The physical labor was a measure of her ability to adapt, but it was also a silent barometer of her acceptance within the pack's rigid hierarchy. Despite the biting conflicts and the relentless scrutiny, there were fragile moments of unexpected kindness that brought a glimmer of hope to Mina's troubled heart. During a pause in the afternoon's harsh work, a fellow Omega, gentle and soft-spoken, paused to offer her a small piece of fruit. The simple gesture, though brief, was imbued with a warmth that momentarily alleviated her overwhelming sense of isolation. Yet even that brief respite was quickly swept away as the relentless pace of duty resumed, and Mina found herself once again swallowed by the pack's unyielding demands. Each day seemed to chip away at her old identity, sculpting a new self defined not by the tender familiarity of the past, but by the hard edges of survival and the echoing mandate to persevere. The promises of protection from Castor lingered like a distant beacon, vague assurances offered in hurried words by a higher-ranking member of the pack. They were meant to instill a sense of security, yet to Mina, they also served as a constant reminder of the price of her new existence. Her freedom, and perhaps even her very soul, had been bartered away. As dusk began to swallow the harsh light of day, the settlement took on an even more austere character. The long shadows cast by the crude, stalwart buildings merged with the creeping darkness, creating an environment of muted hostility and lingering uncertainty. In the quiet between the day's labor and the onset of night, Mina sat alone on a rough-hewn bench outside a communal hall, her head bowed as her thoughts churned in restless contemplation. The chill in the air was biting, yet it did nothing to thaw the cold interior that clung stubbornly to her. In that moment, with the encroaching night and the echoes of the day's harsh lessons, she wondered again, quietly, desperately, if she would ever truly belong. The struggle for acceptance was an arduous journey with no promised destination. Each new task, each critical glance, was a stepping stone in the relentless climb toward integration. And as the stars began to prick the darkening sky, Mina's internal resolve hardened, a determination born of both longing for acceptance and the painful awareness of her fragile place in this ruthless world. Through every insult, every small victory, the quiet hope remained. One day, perhaps, she would no longer be an outsider, a whisper on the wind, but a valued, integral part of the pack's relentless, unforgiving existence. Each day in the savage settlement unfolded with a relentless, unforgiving rhythm. Mina awoke before dawn, her body already weary from the previous day's trials, and stepped out into an environment that was as harsh as it was foreign. The narrow corridors and rough wooden walkways bore the scars of constant activity, coats of mud, worn scars from daily labor, and the ever-present chill of a place that offered no comfort. Every morning, she was met with the stark reality of survival. Endless chores, rigorous training sessions, and the unspoken scrutiny of those around her. During the early hours, Mina labored alongside other pack members, hauling supplies, gathering firewood, and scouring the nearby forest for wild edibles and medicinal herbs. There was a rhythm to their collective work, a monotonous, drum-like thud of boots on wood, punctuated by grunts of exertion and the occasional terse command from a superior. Yet for Mina, the routine was not a source of strength, but a constant reminder of her struggle to belong. Each task seemed designed to measure her worth against an impossible standard, a standard carved out by the fierce expectations of a world ruled by power. In between the grueling physical efforts, moments of quiet introspection offered Mina a bittersweet respite. While she worked, her thoughts often wandered back to a time when life was gentler, when the horizons were not stained with the promise of violence and endless conflict. She recalled the simple beauty of her old village, the light-hearted chatter of neighbors, the familiar faces that offered genuine smiles, and the comforting cadence of a life built on trust and warmth. Now, surrounded by the stern countenances of hardened warriors and the ever-present threat of the savage alpha caster, she questioned her place in this new reality. Do I truly belong here? She would silently wonder, amid the clamor of daily work, her inner voice trembling as if to ask, could loyalty be a double-edged sword? Her training sessions were equally grueling. Under the unyielding gaze of experienced trainers and the watchful eyes of higher-ranking betas, Mina was forced to hone her skills with an intensity that left her both physically drained and mentally haunted. With each swing of her staff and every calculated step during drills, the echo of self-doubt whispered in her ear. The movements she learned were precise and purposeful, a far cry from the fluid, unburdened motions of her past life. Here, every misstep was a failure, and every stumble was a reminder that she was still an outsider trying desperately to blend into an unforgiving system. Yet, even as the relentless training chipped away at her spirit, a spark of determination burned steadily within. Each session built not just her physical strength, but slowly forged an inner resolve, a belief that perhaps one day she might be seen not as a burden, but as a vital part of the pack. Throughout the long days, Mina's mind was a tumult of conflicting emotions. In the midst of the labor and training, she often found herself gazing into the distance, wondering if the harsh faces around her masked a shared pain, or whether they were simply hardened by the same ruthless expectations that tormented her. Doubt gnawed at her, whispering that no matter how hard she tried, she would always be the reluctant newcomer, the one who did not fully belong. Each critical look from a passing beta or an indifferent nod from a fellow warrior stung like a cold wind against her skin, reinforcing the isolation she felt. During brief moments of solitude, when the work slowed and the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the settlement, Mina's thoughts became almost unbearably introspective. She sat for a few minutes on a worn wooden bench outside the communal hall, watching the interplay of light and darkness on the rugged terrain. The unsettling quiet that followed the day's frenzy allowed her to confront the inner conflict that had taken residence within her. The tender memories of her past life, filled with warmth and simple joys, clashed with the brutal necessities of her current existence. It was as if two voices battled within her, one longing for the security of what was lost, and the other urging her to seize a future forged by her own resilience. In those pensive moments, the question that haunted her would rise unbidden, resonating with a bittersweet note. Will they ever see me as one of their own? The question was not just directed toward the others in the pack, but toward her own weary heart. It embodied the struggle between the part of her that yearned for belonging and the reality that seemed so starkly divided by hierarchy, power, and unyielding expectations. The murmurs of doubt grew louder with each passing day, whispered in the clatter of tools, in the muted rustle of sweat on skin, in the solemn faces of those who had long accepted a fate that left little room for self-doubt. And yet, amidst the swirling uncertainty and relentless tasks, there lingered a fragile hope, a promise murmured by small gestures of solidarity from unexpected quarters. A kind word here, a brief nod of understanding there. These fleeting moments provided the emotional sustenance necessary to continue. Each promise of protection from Castor, each reassured command from a trainer or overseer, was a tentative attempt to forge a new identity within a world that valued strength above all. But those assurances were as much a reminder of the price she had paid, a constant reminder that every ounce of loyalty demanded a part of her soul. By the time night began its slow descent, draping the settlement in a cloak of deep, introspective silence, Mina was left alone with her thoughts. The clamor of the day fell away, and in that quiet void, the inner battle raged even louder. The yearning for her past, the longing for the simplicity and acceptance it once offered, clashed with the hard-edged determination to survive in this relentless, unyielding environment. It was in those moments of deep introspection, under the dim glow of a solitary lantern, that she silently asked herself again, could loyalty be a double-edged sword? In the fragile interplay of duty and desire, of conformity and defiance, Mina faced an existential crossroads every day. The relentless demands of her new life carved deep lines of responsibility and self-doubt upon her spirit. And yet, with each challenge, she slowly began to mold a new self, one that might, in time, transcend the pain of isolation and the harsh glare of skepticism. The journey was far from over, and the road ahead was fraught with uncertainty. But within the struggle lay the seeds of a future that could redefine who she was meant to be. Under the watchful eyes of the pack's trainers, Mina stepped onto the worn training ground with a mixture of trepidation and an emerging determination that burned like a slow flame. The area was a simple clearing bordered by rough-hewn wooden posts and scattered with old, faded straw mats that had borne witness to countless sessions of transformation. Today marked the beginning of her metamorphosis, a journey from a timid Omega, burdened by past sorrow, to a fighter reclaiming her inner strength. The early session began with the staff, a long, unadorned piece of wood that had been passed down through generations of warriors. At first, the staff felt heavy and alien in her grip, like an extension of the rigid expectations that had defined her new life. But as Mina moved through slow, deliberate drills, each movement became a conversation with her own potential. Every upward swing and careful pivot echoed the rhythm of a heartbeat, slowly converting fear into determination. Her initial attempts were awkward. Each misstep was met by a mild rebuke from the trainer and a scrunched look from a nearby beta. Yet even those moments of clumsiness carried a strange beauty, the rawness of her struggle, the unmistakable sign that she was giving everything to rise above her past. Mina's muscles burned from the exertion, and every thud of her footsteps on the hard, uneven ground reverberated with an internal resolve. With each passing minute, the staff grew less of a burden and more a symbol of empowerment. Its simple form was beginning to mirror the tenacity forming within her. As the morning faded into a clearer day, Mina moved on to the next phase, hand-to-hand combat training. Here, the atmosphere shifted. There was a palpable charge, a spark of competitive energy that coursed through the small ring established by rough logs and makeshift barriers. The instructors guided her with swift, precise motions, demonstrating defensive blocks and swift counterattacks. The pace was relentless and demanding. Every parry and counter was a lesson in vulnerability turned into strength, a transformation that was both painful and exhilarating. During these one-on-one bouts, she could feel her body responding. The shock of the initial blows that once sent. Her reeling now served as a catalyst for her own controlled responses. The adrenaline surged through her veins with every exchange, creating a cocktail of excitement, fear, and an undeniable sense of empowerment. With each strike, a fraction of her inner timidity was replaced by a growing assurance. In the heat of each encounter, her mind would whisper a question that became a mantra. Is this the first step toward a revolutionary change? That question, posed silently with every graze of wood and every fleeting pause between moves, was both a challenge and a declaration, a promise to herself that she would redefine her destiny. Through relentless training, Mina began to notice changes, not just in her physical abilities, but in the way she perceived herself. Her initial hesitance transformed into a focused intensity. Where her limbs had once trembled, there now emerged a steady rhythm of power and precision. The staff, once a cumbersome reminder of her bondage to fate, now felt like an extension of her spirit. Every swing, every blocking maneuver was executed with a determination that radiated from deep within her soul. The aches and bruises that marked her skin were badges of honor, outward signs of an internal metamorphosis. Between the rigorous drills and the grueling sparring sessions, quieter moments allowed Mina to reflect. In the gentle pause before the next burst of action, she would close her eyes and listen to the sound of her own breathing, a soft rhythm that gradually replaced the pounding doubt of her earlier days. In these moments of introspection, the harsh criticisms of the past and the sting of isolation faded into the background. What remained was the promising hum of transformation, echoing in her every thought. She was not defined by her past inadequacies, but by the fire of determination now burning inside her. Her trainers, seasoned warriors hardened by years of battle, offered terse words of encouragement that felt like molten steel forging her new identity. "Focus your strength," one would say, as he demonstrated a swift pivot, his eyes fixed on her progress. "Every block, every counter makes you stronger," another would add, as Mina absorbed each lesson with a mixture of pain and pride. Despite the occasional harsh remark from a beta or the stern gaze of an overseer, each instruction chipped away at her old self and built a new, more resilient spirit. As the session drew to a close, Mina paused and wiped the sweat and grime from her face. The setting sun cast long, shifting shadows over the training ground, and in its fading light, she saw in herself a fighter who had only just begun to understand the magnitude of her transformation. The exhilaration of the training, coupled with the lingering sting of the day's challenges, left an indelible mark. Her heart, still pounding from the exertion and the crisp rush of battle, whispered anew, "Is this the first step toward a revolutionary change?" In that lingering question lay both a seed of hope and the promise of an evolving destiny. Though the road ahead was unknown and fraught with further hardships, Mina's relentless commitment to transforming her weakness into strength glowed with undeniable promise. With determination etched into every sinew and a resolute fire kindled. In her eyes, Mina embraced the truth of her journey. From a constrained Omega to a determined fighter ready to confront whatever fate had in store. A thick fog of uncertainty and anxiety began to envelop the settlement as whispers of Darius's return spread like wildfire. The ominous rumors, carried on hurried voices and furtive glances, infiltrated every corner of the community. It was as if an invisible storm was gathering overhead, threatening to unleash chaos upon a fragile unity that had barely taken shape. The once stolid routines of daily life now bore the unmistakable mark of impending conflict. Mina could almost feel the tension wrapping around each step she took, a binding force that both isolated and connected every member of the pack. In the early hours, as the first hints of dawn struggled against the heavy darkness, the atmosphere was charged with an unsettling mix of dread and suspicion. Groups of villagers huddled in tight clusters, their conversations muffled but laden with urgency. Phrases such as "Darius is back" and "someone is leaking our secrets" were spoken in hushed tones, each word a spark in the tinderbox of rising tensions. It wasn't long before these murmurs grew into a cacophony of conflicting voices, each one more anxious than the last. Mina, amidst this swelling tide of disquiet, could feel the weight of collective fear pressing down on her. On her morning walk through the narrow lanes, she caught snippets of conversation from passing clusters of pack members. One group argued fervently about the credibility of certain sightings on the border, while another whispered bitterly about betrayals within their ranks. The term traitor had become a bitter refrain, a label tossed around with reckless abandon. Every accusation, no matter how baseless it might have seemed, stoked the flames of discontent and deepened the rift between loyalty and suspicion. The faces around her reflected a deep inner turmoil. Hardened expressions, quick glances exchanged, over shoulders and furtive looks filled with unspoken accusations revealed that trust was rapidly eroding. Mina found herself caught in the middle of it all, a silent observer to the brewing storm. With every step, her mind churned with conflicted thoughts. Could such an environment of mistrust eventually lead to open conflict? Was there anyone left who could truly be counted on in these trying times? As the day progressed, the palpable tension was mirrored in every facet of the settlement. The daily chores and training sessions now seemed to serve a dual purpose. While they were essential for survival and preparation, they also became forced displays of allegiance, a public show of unity amid the swirling chaos of suspicion. In the training grounds, the crisp, measured movements of warriors seemed tainted by a lingering edge of menace. Even the smallest misstep, or a momentary lapse in focus, was met with a sideways glance of disapproval, an unspoken question of loyalty that hung heavily in the air. During a brief lull in the grueling schedule, Mina found herself isolated on a rocky outcrop, staring out at the darkening horizon. The wind carried distant sounds, a low murmur that might have been the rustling of leaves, or perhaps the ominous growl of an unseen threat. In that solitary moment, the myriad fears of the community converged in her mind, forming an intricate web of anxiety. Every whisper of wind, every creak of ancient timbers, seemed to echo the foreboding news that Darius, a formidable foe to Castor, might be mobilizing his forces at any moment. The rising tension reached a fever pitch during the evening assembly, where the pack leaders attempted to restore order. The normally resolute leaders' voices faltered as they addressed the crowd, their words heavy with the significance of the recent events. "We face more than just external dangers," one leader declared in a strained tone. "There is talk of a traitor among us, undermining our defenses from within." His words sent a ripple of shock through the gathered assembly, as the community struggled to reconcile the dual threats of an external enemy and internal betrayal. The air was thick with expectancy. Every face in the room was a mask of apprehension, every eye flickering with the shared dread of imminent conflict. In that charged environment, Mina's heart pounded with a mix of fear and defiance. The community she had been slowly forced to integrate into was now on the brink of fracturing under the strain of distrust. The looming possibility of betrayal, coupled with the menacing return of Darius, created a precarious balance that seemed ready to collapse with a single spark. Later that evening, as the meeting dispersed into anxious clusters, Mina caught snippets of one final unsettling remark that sent a shiver down her spine. "Will this brewing storm shatter the fragile alliances?" someone whispered, the question hanging in the air like a dark omen. It was a question that encapsulated the deep-rooted worries of every member of the settlement, one that resonated within Mina's own turbulent thoughts. Could the rising tide of suspicion and impending conflict finally rip apart the tenuous bonds that held them together? Or was there a flicker of hope, however slender, that unity might somehow be restored even in the midst of such relentless adversity? As the gathering drifted into the chill of the night, the storm, both literal and metaphorical, continued to build outside. The distant rumble of thunder mingled with the murmured fears of those who remained, each sound a reminder of the chaos that was fast approaching. In the dim light of flickering torches and the muted glow of the moon, Mina's inner struggle persisted. The question she faced was as daunting as it was essential. Amid rising tension, suspicion, and the dread of betrayal, could the fragile alliances forged in the heat of survival withstand the impending storm? In the center of the pack's fortified hall, under a flickering array of torchlight and heavy, determined faces, a fateful council had been convened. Castor, with his imposing presence dominating the room, led the discussion. The air was dense with the weight of uncertainty. Every word was measured and heavy with implication, as if each syllable was a step toward an irreversible decision. The subject of their meeting was as daunting as it was clear. A trade offer from Darius, a rival force whose reappearance heralded not peace, but the ominous possibility of war. Rowan, his eyes bright with both resolve and apprehension, began the discussion with a voice that trembled slightly from the gravity of the moment. "We stand at a crossroads," he declared, his tone firm yet edged with quiet desperation. "Darius's invitation is not merely a call for trade. It is a challenge, a subtle invitation to expose our vulnerabilities. We must ask ourselves, what do we risk by engaging with him?" His words, delivered with the burden of past losses and the fear of what might come, set the stage for what was to follow. Across the room, Cora's gaze was unwavering, her stance as unyielding as the old oaks outside. When she spoke, her voice was low, decisive, and laced with a quiet authority that cut through the simmering tension like a blade. "We cannot allow ourselves to be lured into a trap," Cora stated, her words resonating in the hushed chamber. "Every offer from Darius must be examined with suspicion. His intentions are as dark as the shadows that now fill our borders. We owe it to ourselves, and to our pack, to ensure that any engagement with him does not fracture our unity." Her tone left no room for error or second thoughts, marking a stark contrast to the wavering uncertainty that had been visible moments before. As the leaders continued, the discussion unfolded like an intricate chess match. Castor, though a figure of immense power, was not without his doubts. His gaze swept over the gathered advisors and warriors, seeking reassurance in their silent nods and measured expressions. "This parley," he intoned slowly, "could be the moment when everything changes. The balance of power is delicate, and we must decide. Do we stand together, united under a single purpose, or do we fracture under the weight of our suspicions?" His words, echoing through the stone chamber, were met with a murmur of agreement and anxiety. Throughout the session, every word carried the force of destiny. Rowan's earlier apprehensions were now met with a strategic clarity, born of countless battles fought both outside and within. "We have seen the signs, a gathering storm on our borders, whispered rumors of betrayal from within," he continued. "We must weigh our options carefully. Trust is a rare commodity in these times, and we cannot afford to be split by internal dissent." His measured tone, though laced with the tension of impending confrontation, was also a call to decisive action, a reminder that the survival of the pack depended on unity in the face of a rising threat. Meanwhile, a subordinate advisor, his face gaunt with worry, interjected softly about the possibility of hidden traitors among them. His words were cautious, adding another layer of uncertainty to an already precarious discussion. The question hung in the air, silent yet potent. Could there really be a traitor within their midst? Every head in the room turned, eyes flickering with a mix of fear, suspicion, and anger. Even Castor's stern gaze softened for a moment as he considered the possibility, a risk that could cost them everything if left unaddressed. As the debate pressed on, the atmosphere in the council grew increasingly charged with both anxiety and a heavy sense of resolve. The ancient stone walls, adorned with symbols of past victories and hard-won sacrifices, seemed to watch over the proceedings as if bearing witness to the destiny being forged within. Cora's crisp affirmation and Rowan's resolute declarations built a cadence of hope, tempered by stark realism. "We must decide now," Cora said, her voice rising above the murmurs. "This is not the time for idle speculation. We face an enemy who is as cunning as he is ruthless. Our every move must be calculated, every alliance scrutinized." In that charged moment, the council's focus turned once again to the central dilemma, the Darius offer. Every leader's eyes met Castor's, searching for a sign, a hint of the direction in which their fates would be sealed. The silent weight of expectation was palpable, each beating heart in that hall echoing with the threat of impending war. Could this be the moment when everything changes? Castor's question, posed in a quiet, yet deeply penetrating tone, reverberated through the room. It was a question that encapsulated the fear and possibility intermingled in their very souls. The risk of shattering the delicate bonds that held them together, against the chance to redefine their future on their own terms. As the council drew to a close, the leaders reached a tentative decision to send out scouts and prepare for any eventuality. The fateful discussion left no room for complacency. Every member was charged with the task of watching, of remaining vigilant against both external threats and internal treachery. The final words of the meeting hung in the air, a stark, decisive command that underscored the high stakes of their collective future. In the deep, lingering silence of that fateful chamber, amid the resolute declarations and the somber nods of hardened warriors, one question remained to echo in every troubled mind. Could this be the moment when everything changes, when the decision made in this council reshapes the destiny of the pack forever? Under the veil of night and amid a chorus of distant howls, the rescue mission was set into motion. The target was clear. Castor, the formidable alpha whose authority had always commanded both fear and reverence, had been captured by the forces of Darius. The grim news had spread like wildfire through the ranks, igniting a desperate urgency among the pack. Mina, fueled by a fierce resolve and a deep personal debt owed to the alpha, resolved that this was the moment to repay that debt, regardless of the danger. Every beat of her heart pulsed with the promise of retribution and liberation. The plan was as dangerous as it was audacious. Under the cover of dense darkness, a select group of warriors, led by seasoned veterans and emboldened by the resolve of their mission, assembled at a hidden clearing on the outskirts of the enemy camp. The air was thick with anticipation, each member aware that one misstep could spell disaster. Mina stood among them, her hands steady, yet adrenaline making her skin tingle with a sense of impending action. Every muscle in her body vibrated with readiness, and the echo of her own heartbeat was the only sound that could rival the low murmur of the gathering wind. Their approach was silent and methodical. Moving like shadows, they skirted along the perimeter of Darius's camp, which bristled with guards patrolling in tight formation. Every rustle in the underbrush, every shift of movement seemed magnified against the backdrop of the night. Mina's senses were heightened. The sharp clink of a drawn blade, the hushed exchange of battle commands, and the barely perceptible thud of footsteps created a symphony of tension that underscored the gravity of their mission. As they neared the compound where Castor was held, the dark silhouette of a makeshift prison came into view. A crude structure built of wood and metal, guarded by an array of armed sentinels whose patrols were both heavy and systematic. The sight of it made Mina's heart thunder in her chest, a reminder of the stakes involved. "This is it," one of the warriors murmured, his voice barely audible over the pounding of her pulse. The words were simple but profound, a signal that the moment to act had arrived, and there was no turning back. Mina's mind raced with a potent mix of emotions: determination, fear, and an unwavering loyalty that spurred her forward. In the heat of the moment, memories of Castor's command and the subtle promises of protection he had offered echoed in her thoughts. She knew that every ounce of her strength now must be directed toward rescuing him, and as she gripped the hilt of her blade, a silent vow resounded within her. This is the moment to repay the debt. The assault began with swift, precise strikes. Using every ounce of stealth and agility they possessed, the warriors breached the outer perimeter of the enemy camp with an almost preternatural silence. Mina moved like a shadow, graceful and unyielding, even as the adrenaline surged through her veins. The clashing of steel echoed in the night as blades met defenses, sparks dancing in the gloom. Each parry and counterattack was a vivid display of martial prowess, a testament to the relentless training that had slowly molded her from a hesitant Omega into a burgeoning fighter. Amidst the chaos of clashing weapons and urgent shouts, Mina's focus sharpened to a fine point. A flurry of movement drew her attention, a guard lunging from the darkness, his eyes wide with shock as she intercepted his attack with a decisive block. The sound of metal clashing against metal was deafening in the heat of the moment, punctuated by her own rapid breathing and the relentless drumming of her heart. Every movement was measured, every strike purposeful. The danger was tangible. Each moment teetered on a knife's edge between life and death. Yet Mina's resolve only grew stronger. The rescue operation surged into a crescendo of action as they finally reached the holding area where Castor was kept. His imposing figure, though weakened by captivity, still retained the commanding aura that had defined him for years. Bound by heavy chains and guarded by a handful of vigilant enemies, he lay in a state that defied the image of an unbreakable alpha. In that instant, fury and determination welled up within Mina like a tidal wave. With a cry fueled by both anger and loyalty, she advanced, her blade a blur of motion as it cut through the encumbrances of Castor's restraints. "I won't let you go," she whispered fiercely under her breath, a promise that was both a personal vow and a declaration of insurgent defiance against their oppressors. The ensuing combat was a dizzying array of maneuvers and countermaneuvers, with Mina and her comrades fighting with a unity born of desperation. The battlefield was illuminated sporadically by flashes of torches and the glint of steel, each burst of light revealing the intense, almost primal expressions etched on the faces of the rescuers. The sounds of clashing blades and the grunts of exertion mingled with the echoing, rapid pulse of Mina's own heartbeat, creating a symphony of chaos that was as beautiful as it was brutal. In the heat of the fray, every strike, every parry served as a testament to her transformation. The pain of each bruise was a small price to pay for the reclaiming of her power, an affirmation that she was not merely a victim of circumstance. With every carefully executed blow, she felt a rush of empowerment, a fleeting moment where the promise of a new beginning shone through the darkness of their dire reality. As she moved to clear away any remaining obstacles and secure Castor's release, her inner voice repeated a mantra, steady and resolute. This is the moment to repay the debt. Finally, as the last of the enemy forces faltered and retreated, into the gloom, a heavy silence fell over the rescue site. The adrenaline slowly ebbed, leaving behind a space filled with the raw, pounding realization of what they had accomplished. Castor, though battered and still in chains, was free, his eyes meeting Mina's with a conflicted mixture of gratitude and an unspoken understanding that their fates were now irrevocably entwined. In that suspended moment of post-battle stillness, as the sounds of conflict dwindled into whispers, the night seemed to hold its breath. Every warrior, every soul present, felt the weight of what had just transpired. A heroic, pulse-pounding act of rebellion that would resonate through the ages. And in the quiet aftermath, as the dust settled and the echoes of their defiant charge faded into the darkness, one question lingered in the charged air. Was this the first step toward a revolutionary change? The aftermath of the rescue mission was a journey wrought with exhaustion and raw emotion. Under the pale light of a waning moon, Mina and the remaining warriors found themselves slipping away from the chaos of battle, their escape measured in ragged breaths and weary steps. Every footfall on the forest floor echoed the heavy burden of the past few hours. Hours filled with blistering clashes, desperate struggles, and the triumphant yet painful liberation of Castor. Yet now, as they fled into the dense cover of the wilderness, a different kind of trial awaited them. The challenge of evading pursuit and finding solace in a world that had become as perilous as it was unpredictable. The forest offered both refuge and uncertainty. Narrow, winding paths led through ancient groves where the trees stood like silent sentinels, their gnarled roots twisting through the underbrush. The air was thick with the damp scent of earth and decay, a constant reminder of life's impermanence. In this somber landscape, the adrenaline of battle slowly gave way to an overwhelming fatigue, the emotional toll of their ordeal settling in like a heavy shroud. Mina's body ached in protest with every step, and her mind replayed the frenzied moments of combat, now rendered into a bittersweet montage of fierce determination mixed with lingering grief. Beside her, Castor leaned heavily on a fallen log, his usual indomitable presence visibly diminished by fresh wounds and the weight of captivity. Despite his scars and the chains of his ordeal, there was a subtle light in his eyes, a spark of unyielding resilience, and an unspoken appreciation for the sacrifice that had freed him. In the quiet intervals between desperate sprints and hushed commands to keep moving, Mina stole glances at him. In those fleeting moments, a silent empathy passed between them. Both understood the profound cost of survival. Their shared pain, the haunted look in Castor's eyes, and the steadfast determination in Mina's gaze, crafted a delicate bond amid their uncertain escape. As the group pressed onward through the labyrinth of the wild, every crunch of fallen leaves beneath their feet, and every sigh of the wind became a poignant reminder of what had been lost. The injured occasionally murmured in quiet agony, and even the night itself seemed to mourn with them, cloaking the forest in a melancholy that was both eerie and tender. The liberating thrill of their earlier victory was now tempered by the stark reality of their scars, both physical and emotional. In the deepest recesses of her soul, Mina grappled with conflicting emotions. Relief that they had escaped the immediate clutches of their enemy, yet a persistent, gnawing sorrow for the lives upended by fate's cruel hand. In one quiet clearing, under the sparse glow of a hidden lantern, the group finally paused. The stillness was palpable, a bittersweet reprieve from the relentless pace of their flight. Mina sat on a weathered stump, her limbs heavy with exhaustion, while Castor, careful not to disturb the fragile silence, moved closer. In that moment, the silence spoke volumes. Each heartbeat, each shared glance between them, was laden with the weight of unspoken questions and tentative hopes. Castor's fingers, still trembling from the recent ordeal, brushed lightly against Mina's arm. There was a deep sadness in his eyes, an acknowledgement of the scars they bore together, but also a spark of hope that perhaps the chains of destiny could be broken. The murmurs of the group faded into the background as Mina's thoughts turned inward. The relief of having won their immediate battle was tempered by the precarious reality of their circumstances. Every step they had taken after the conflict had reminded her that freedom was never absolute. It was a fragile state, easily shattered by the next wave of violence or treachery. The forest, with its intertwining paths and shifting shadows, became a metaphor for their uncertain future. In that reflective silence, Mina's mind kept returning to a haunting question. Can they truly escape the chains of fate and reclaim their destiny? For a long, tense moment, The forest seemed to hold its breath, as if contemplating the weight of her query. The quiet was filled only with the distant rustle of leaves and the soft, sorrowful cries of nocturnal creatures. Every sound was magnified in the stillness, amplifying her inner turmoil. She remembered the merciless roar of battle, the sharp clang of steel, and the desperate shouts of her comrades. They now seemed like relics of a life that was rapidly receding into memory. In contrast, the present was defined by slow, measured breaths and a tentative, raw hope. A hope that was as fragile as the flickering light of the lantern. As the night wore on, Mina and her companions resumed their trek, the forest's darkness, mingling with an air of grim determination. The emotional tapestry of the escape was woven from threads of intense pain, the heavy burden of loss, and the faintest glimmer of solace found in shared resilience. Castor, ever the stoic presence, offered brief yet potent words of thanks that resonated deeply within her. Each whispered, "Thank you," felt like a promise to honor the sacrifices made that night, to transform anguish into a fierce commitment, to fight for a future unbound by predestination. Even as the first hints of dawn threatened the sanctity of night, the question lingered in every heart. Can they truly escape the chains of fate and reclaim their destiny? The escape was far from over, and every step carried the uncertainty of what lay ahead. But for that fleeting, precious moment, amid the mingled relief and the bittersweet aftermath of their hard-fought victory, a fragile hope was born. A hope that, against all odds, they might yet shape their own future. In the weeks that followed the rescue mission, a quiet revolution began to unfurl within the hearts and minds of the pack. The savage settlement, with all its harshness and rigid codes, became the crucible in which Mina's transformation was gradually forged. Every day, as the pack set about rebuilding what had been shattered by conflict, Mina found herself reclaiming not only her physical strength, but also the remnants of her inner spirit. The long days of labor, repairing crumbling wooden structures, tending to the wounded, and organizing supplies, served as both a distraction and a catalyst, enabling her to redefine herself amid adversity. At first, the tasks felt overwhelming. Each new challenge was a reminder of her past frailty and the isolation she had once known. Yet, with every heave of heavy timber and every measured step in the meticulous reassembly of shelter and order, a subtle shift occurred. Mina discovered that strength was not only measured in physical endurance, but in the quiet resilience that blossomed within her when she refused to give up. The steady rhythm of daily life, punctuated by moments of shared hardship and small victories, became the foundation of a burgeoning new identity, one that was slowly rewriting the narrative of the once timid Omega. Her mornings began with a rigorous routine that merged duty with personal discovery. At dawn, she would join her fellow warriors as they labored under the fresh, clear light of a rising sun. In the early hours, when the world was still cloaked in a serene hush, Mina's mind wandered to memories of her past, a past filled with gentle routines and the soft murmur of a village life now lost. But even as nostalgia tugged at her, she pressed forward, determined to channel that longing into an unwavering drive. Each task, whether it was mending a fractured roof or carrying water from the well, became a stepping stone in her journey toward self-empowerment. During moments of brief solitude, when the clamor of communal work subsided into a pensive lull, Mina would retreat to the outskirts of the settlement where nature's raw beauty offered a semblance of quiet reflection. There, among ancient trees and whispering pines, she allowed herself to feel the full spectrum of her transformation. The ache in her muscles, once a symbol of her vulnerability, now served as a testament to the relentless fortitude she had cultivated. In the stillness of the forest, she would close her eyes and let the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a wild creature remind her of one simple truth. Every battle fought, whether on the training ground or within her own heart, was a victory over the inertia of fear. Her instructors, once distant figures of authority, began to view her with a cautious respect. Even the stern words of correction from seasoned betas gradually softened into acknowledgments of a maturing spirit. "You're holding your ground well today," one veteran remarked as he observed her swift, precise movements during hand-to-hand drills. Such praise, though sparse, fueled a quiet pride within her. Each piece of encouragement was like a spark, igniting a deeper, more profound belief that she was evolving into something formidable. A warrior, not defined by her past weaknesses, but by the strength emerging from every challenge she conquered. Every successful block, every perfectly timed counterattack became not only an achievement in combat, but a symbol of the inner transformation unfolding within her. The once trembling Omega now moved with a measured grace and assuredness that belied the hardships she had endured. As her training progressed, the mirror of her achievements reflected a woman who was emerging from the shadows of her former self, a woman increasingly capable of facing the relentless storm of life head-on. Yet, even amid this inspiring growth, doubts sometimes crept back into her mind. In quieter moments, when the adrenaline of the day's struggles had ebbed away, she would feel a gnawing uncertainty, an echo of the past that reminded her of the harsh cost of survival. During these introspective intervals, as the settlement settled into the calm of the twilight hours, she would ask herself with a bittersweet tone, is she becoming the warrior she always dreamed she could be? The question lingered in the silence, a seed of hope intermingled with the weight of expectation. In conversations with her peers, Mina gradually began to shed the label of Omega. Colleagues who had once looked upon her with doubt now offered subtle nods of acknowledgement, as if silently admitting that she had earned a place in their midst. Even as she faced the daily grind of rebuilding, there was an unspoken promise in every shared smile and every supportive gesture. That change was not only possible, but inevitable, when faced with relentless determination and the courage to confront one's inner demons. As the days turned into weeks, the transformation was evident not just in her physical prowess, but in the quiet confidence that now resonated in her voice and posture. The once fragile spirit that had known only sorrow and apprehension was being replaced by a resilient core, one that learned to flourish even in the harsh light of adversity. The journey was far from over, and every new challenge was another opportunity to solidify her newfound identity. And in the midst of it all, as she integrated further into the fabric of the pack and let the pulse of the savage world redefine her, the ultimate question remained, a question that echoed in her mind with each deliberate, triumphant step. Is she becoming the warrior she always dreamed she could be? In the fragile calm that followed the chaos of battle, an unexpected tenderness began to bloom between Mina and Castor. Amidst the lingering echoes of clashing steel and the quiet lament of wounded soldiers, moments of intimacy emerged like delicate blossoms daring to thrive in barren winter. The aftermath of conflict had scarred them both, physically and emotionally, but in the soft spaces between duty and despair, their hearts found solace in one another. Late one night, when the camp was hushed by fatigue and the only illumination came from the flickering light of a solitary lantern, Mina found herself drawn to Castor's side. He sat silently on a weathered log, his face marked by fresh bruises and old wounds alike. The air between them was charged with unspoken emotions, an intricate tapestry of pain, longing, and defiant hope. Overwhelmed by the quiet vulnerability of the moment, Mina hesitated before softly calling his name, as if reluctant to disturb the fragile silence they both cherished. Castor's eyes met hers, and in that look, 1,000 unspoken words passed between them. His voice, gentle and low despite his usual commanding tone, broke the silence. "I never imagined amidst all this chaos I would find a reason to hope," he murmured, his words tinted with both regret and a promise that transcended the battlefield. Mina's heart stirred at his confession. For so long, she had believed that survival meant nothing more than enduring endless hardship. But now that she was here, near him, she dared to imagine a future where love might heal even the deepest of wounds. Their conversation unfolded slowly, like a tender dance in the midst of a storm. They spoke of dreams and memories, of days before the world had been divided by conflict, when the notion of peace was not a distant memory. Castor recalled fragments of a life where he too had known love, a gentle past obscured by the brutal necessities of leadership. Mina, in turn, shared quiet tales of her former life, of simple joys and the lingering sweetness of freedom that now seemed almost mythic. With each word, their barriers crumbled, replaced by a fragile intimacy that defied the savage world around them. In that quiet moment, as they leaned into one another, a soft, tentative kiss bridged the gap between their scars. It was a kiss laden with both sorrow and an unspoken promise of renewal, a tender defiance of a fate that had cast them into endless turmoil. The caress of their lips was as much a healing balm as it was a declaration. Amidst chaos and carnage, a new bond was being forged, one that interwove their destinies in ways that no one could have foreseen. Yet, as their shared warmth deepened, underlying currents of conflict and mistrust still rippled beneath the surface. The war outside was relentless, and the memories of recent battles loomed large like unwelcome phantoms. In the quiet hours that followed their brief embrace, as they rested side by side in the dim glow of the encampment, Castor's guarded gaze would occasionally flicker with the weight of command and the burden of responsibility. Mina, sensing both his tenderness and his inner turmoil, whispered softly, "Can this fragile love become the beacon of hope in a world of savagery?" Her question, tender yet defiant, hung in the air as if daring the night to answer. Their growing bond did not go unnoticed by the others. Whispers of their closeness began to circulate among the warriors, half in envy, half in cautious approval. Some saw in their union the potential for a new era, a renewal of strength drawn from shared vulnerability. Others, hardened by years of conflict, met it with skeptical frowns, unable to reconcile the softness of love with the harsh realities of war. In that charged atmosphere, each whispered word and passing glance reflected not just the state of their personal hearts, but the turbulent spirit of the pack itself, a collective yearning for salvation amid the endless strife. As days turned into nights, and the cycle of conflict ebbed and flowed around them, Mina and Castor often found themselves stealing precious moments away from the relentless demands of leadership and survival. In these brief interludes, they nurtured a connection that grew from the seeds of mutual respect and shared pain. Their conversations became a solace, an intermission in the brutal rhythm of life, and each stolen kiss a promise that, even amidst chaos, the human spirit could find its sanctuary in the arms of another. In the midst of a world battered by incessant conflict, Mina felt that this unexpected tenderness might be the spark needed to kindle a revolution from within, a change that could transform not only her own destiny, but possibly the fate of their entire pack. With every encounter, every shared moment of passionate vulnerability, the uncertain future seemed to gain a glimmer of possibility. Yet beneath the tender defiance lay an ever-present question. Could love, fragile and fiercely born in battle, truly survive the storm? As the night deepened and the embers of their whispered promises mingled with the distant roar of war, their hearts held on to that hope, daring to believe in the possibility of renewal and the resilience of intertwined fates. At the break of a new dawn, the pack gathered in the central courtyard with a renewed sense of unity and purpose. The crisp morning air carried a promise of hope as the villagers, once divided by doubt and suspicion, now wore expressions of determination and acceptance. Amid the familiar calls and the subtle rustling of preparation, Castor's commanding presence strode forward, his gaze sweeping over the gathered warriors with a quiet intensity that mirrored the weight of their shared experiences. Mina, whose journey had been one of profound transformation, from a reluctant Omega burdened by fate to a determined and resilient warrior, stood amidst the assembly with her head held high. The road that had once been paved with isolation and uncertainty had led her here, where every wary glance that had once haunted her now gave way to a nod of respect and solidarity. In that moment, The scars of past battles no longer marked her as broken, but as the hard-won insignia of strength. Castor's voice, deep and steady with authority, broke the subdued morning silence as he began to speak. "From this day forth," he declared, his tone resonating with both resolve and warmth, "we recognize Mina not as an outsider forced into our midst, but as a chosen warrior, a valued partner in all that we face." His announcement, simple yet laden with profound meaning, was met with murmurs of approval and heartfelt applause that rippled through the crowd. For so long, Mina had carried the weight of feeling different, unwanted. Now, in the light of this new dawn, she was embraced as one of them, a vital and indispensable part of the pack's collective future. Rowan, too, lent his quiet support, his weathered face softening as he extended a nod of acknowledgement to Mina. The once uncertain glances from those around her were replaced by a shared understanding. Their struggles had forged a unity that transcended previous divisions. Each warrior present had his own battles, his own scars, yet they were now united by the common goal of survival and the promise of a new era built on mutual respect. In that moment, the pack transformed from a collection of individuals into a cohesive family, where every member's journey contributed to the strength of the whole. The morning passed with the buzz of renewed activity. Plans were quickly set into motion as Castor and his trusted advisors gathered around an ancient weathered map spread out on a massive wooden table. There was a sense of clarity in their discussions, a resolve to face the looming challenges with a strategy forged from both hard-won experience and fresh hope. Among them, Mina listened intently, absorbing every detail. She felt a deep stirring of responsibility, a desire to not only protect her newfound family, but also to help shape a future that was no longer dictated solely by fate's cruelty. As the council discussed patrol routes, trade alliances, and potential threats lurking beyond the horizon, a soft murmur of optimism began to infuse the air. "We will rebuild," one of Castor's lieutenants affirmed, his words laced with the conviction of someone who had faced insurmountable odds. "Our unity is our strength, and together, we will forge a path to a better future." The announcement was more than just strategic planning. It was a declaration of trust and a promise that every member of the pack, regardless of their past, would be given a chance to contribute to their collective destiny. In the quieter moments that followed the assembly, as the camp slowly stirred to life and the golden hues of dawn bathed the settlement, Mina stole a quiet moment for herself. Sitting at the edge of the communal fire, she recalled the long, painful journey that had led her here. The struggle, the relentless training, the tearful separations from a life once known, and the bitter taste of despair and rejection. Yet, layered over these memories was now the gentle warmth of acceptance and the invigorating spark of possibility. Her thoughts drifted to a quiet, soulful question. What lies ahead for those who dare to transform their destiny? The question echoed in the soft crackling of the fire, mingling with the steady rhythm of supportive murmurs from her comrades. Castor joined her briefly, his presence both comforting and formidable. He spoke quietly about the challenges that remained, of how the world outside their borders was ever-changing and uncertain. And yet, with a subtle smile, he reminded her that true strength was found in solidarity. "Together," he said softly, "we have the power to redefine our fate. We are not bound by the labels of the past, but by the strength we forge in unity." His words resonated with Mina, reinforcing the belief that her painful journey had been a necessary part of her growth. Every hardship had brought her closer to this moment of fulfillment. As the day unfurled with purpose and the whisper of a hopeful horizon, the pack moved as one. They worked side by side, repairing their homes, sharpening their weapons, and sharing quietly optimistic plans for the future. In this collective endeavor, Mina finally saw her place not as an unwilling outcast, but as a warrior and partner whose inner transformation had elevated her to an essential role in the pack's destiny. In the final moments of the morning, as the renewed energy of the settlement took hold, and the shadows of the past receded in the light of new beginnings. A sense of profound unity filled the space. With each new day, a future was being written, a future that promised to be as unpredictable as it was hopeful. And in that shared commitment to rebuild and redefine their existence, the pack stood together, hearts aligned in a resolute embrace of what might come next. For in this new dawn, the echoes of an old world faded into memory, replaced by the resounding promise of a family forged not in the absence of struggle, but in the triumph over it. And as Mina looked toward the horizon, her heart beating with a quiet, determined rhythm, she could only wonder, what lies ahead for those who dare to transform their destiny?